I had been constantly pitted against my dad, the narcissist. It was like everything bad, 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 you're terrible. And it really wasn't until somebody, like I sat in front of a therapist and my whole life story had been about how he was such a terrible person. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not at that place of being able to forgive him. But I will say that sitting in front of that therapist and having her tell me, do you see that that your mother allowed that to happen? And I was like, what? Like, how could you say that? Because I was so enmeshed with my codependent parent that there was no way in hell that I could possibly see them as bad. I was like, what do you mean? She's always been there. She's been my ride or die. It's the only thing I have. Because if I were to see her as bad, or, oh my God, like what would that mean about my entire reality?
When I grew up, I remember that I was a little bit enmeshed by my mom, and I think she always asked me to be nice to people, to help people, you know? And it was so interesting because I realized that my sensitivity and empathy was actually created because I was so hyper aware as a child, because it was a bit like emotionally unsafe. But basically I was always told, oh, you're so sensitive and empathic and nice, you know, so you have to be this way. And I think I realized that when I'm like this, first of all, I get kind of like, my mom tells me that, you know, I'm a good person, but also other people like find me then nice, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, is like, as a culture, we breed codependency. We breed people to violate their own boundaries all the time. And sometimes in the most subtle ways that you'd never think, like, oh, go hug this person when you don't want to hug them, even though it doesn't feel good for you. And enmeshment completely, because there's so many times where you have a boundary and then the person's like, well, that's bad. You can't want that or need that. And so you just start to adapt to what everything else is. And then when you're an adult, what that looks like is people who get their boundaries violated, or they're violating their own boundaries, and then they're like missing that whole portion, and all they're left with is the emotional feeling afterwards of like, I don't feel good in my relationships. I don't feel good in how, like, what's being done to me in the moment, or it can play out in sex or something, for example, like letting people go farther than what you're comfortable with, because it's such an ingrained part to even just bulldoze over those boundaries, because we have these mechanisms inside of us that tell us when something's not right for us. And when you override and shut those down for so long at such a young age, we don't even notice really when our boundaries are being violated sometimes until it's way too late, or it's so subtle that maybe it's like, oh, I'm confused in the moment and it happens so quickly. So I think that's why boundary work is so important, and getting in touch with really what your needs are, and looking at all the ways that the things that we feel bad about wanting or needing, because that will prevent us, that shame that we got originally from our parents, this is not okay for you to have this or need this, that will block us being honest with ourselves about what we really do need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely what you're saying. I mean, we talked about this in the other interview you had that I would really recommend watching. It's about enmeshment trauma. And there we touched on a little bit, right? That the super enmeshed child, is basically becoming the codependent, because also they never learn to set this boundary, or I guess they learn that if they don't set the boundary, then they get love, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whereas the narcissist would be like, if I don't set the boundary, then I'm just suffering. So I set the boundary like very, very strong and never let anyone close to me. Yeah. Yeah. And like, I feel like the more I understand codependency, the more I feel like it's like this underlying disease that, as what I touched on before, when I research on YouTube, I always just feel like that codependents are the ones that are the victims, and narcissists are the ones that like are hurting them. But now I feel like codependency is actually like the bigger disease, because it's kind of like the person that is hurting others without being looked at as such, and that is more dangerous, right? Like if you meet someone like let's say like a triple narcissist is like a very obvious asshole, but at least you know that they are assholes. But codependents, I think, are the people that are, you even feel like it's love what they're doing to you, but actually it's not, you know. And that's what you said in the enmeshment video. It was, for example, the mom who is like hugging you, and everyone's like, oh, she's so nice, but the kid feels that actually the mom is just hugging them so that she gets love, so that she gets looked at as the good mom, so that maybe, oh my gosh, a big, I think, codependent thing is to maybe get the children on your side, so that, you know, they are more closer to you than to your partner, to get back at them. So many like manipulative things. Ugh.
Yep. And really that last point that you're talking about is there's so many subtle little tiny things. And the some of the things I've noticed with my own recovery with codependency is that you don't even know what those tiny little things were, because so much of what your childhood experiences, you're just normalized to it. And it's not until you get older and you start to realize like how that's affected how you have relationships that you're like, wow, the tiny little, because that kind of dysfunction in families is not something that people are readily admitting to. So you're never going to get your parents to say, yeah, I really wanted you to be on my side because I wanted to get back at your dad. So I pitted you in between both of us. Like, unless your parents are really conscious, you're not really going to get that validation. So it can feel like, why is there this confusing gaslight that's happening and nobody's talking about it or admitting to it? And you may never get that resolution, but just knowing that there was really unconscious motivations that feel icky, and but then we have to play into it, because if you don't play into the dysfunction, then you go bye-bye.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think it is so deeply ingrained in culture. Like, for example, the codependent narcissist relationship is so often has to do with gender, you know, that typically like the mom is more the codependent and dad is more the narcissist. Why? Because women did not have power. So they took power in the household. Their power was to be the one that is close with the kids, to be the one that, you know, she has to manipulatively try to gain power, because otherwise she doesn't have it, obviously. And so when it is so cultural, it's like people do not even like think about it. They don't even, because it's like normal. And I think also that then often, for example, the woman would even say like, you know, my life is anyway so bad. Now you're even also like criticizing me. And I found that these are like the worst dynamics if it's so culturally ingrained.
Yeah. I really, really like that you're talking about gender, because it's so true. That's exactly what happened, was women had to take power back in the household. So we had to do it in manipulative and covert ways. And I think, again, like going back to this whole thing on sex and codependency, there's been like really only recently where women are starting in history to talk about what feels good for them in sex. And really before, it was like it's like women many times weren't having orgasms or anything like that, because there was no connection into talking about needs and what people need. And there was just like, I think that sex in our culture is like an example of how we're starting to get really honest with what our needs are, instead of just giving our partner, for example, the satisfaction of feeling like they did something to please us, when in reality we're not pleased by them, so that they can continue. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure I've done that. There have been times when I was much younger where I made somebody think that they gave me an orgasm because I thought that that's what they wanted. They wanted me to be happy. It had nothing to do with my own genuine happiness or something. That's just something I think about when we talk about gender dynamics and expressing needs. And I think that there's also, if you want to flip it around the other way around, like for men, there's a lot of things that needs that men have that they don't feel like they can express either, because that would somehow make them bad or wrong. And when we need to get honest about that too.
Absolutely. Yes, I absolutely agree. Like, yeah, sexuality is such a big topic, and especially because it's such a shadow topic. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like society is slowly catching up with, you know, like emotional needs but I think that for me as a feminist, a big turning point of mine was to understand, how am I hurting men? And that is a lot with healing from codependency, you know, that I am not emotionally manipulating, that I'm not using, because I often was better at communicating than men, and that I kind of like confuse them, you know, and put them in the corner of being the asshole, that I'm looking for a compatible partner. That's also very important, that wants to actually meet my needs. And that I stopped seeing the narcissist as this horrible, abusive person, but instead that they are as traumatized as I am. They are just as me, trying to, you know, find love and find connection. And one actually so beautiful thing happened since I'm doing this, is that my relationship with my father has skyrocketed, like so
Wow.
incredibly much. Yes.
I'm curious to know, just side note, if your dad was like, was he a narcissist growing up? Like, would that, yeah, that's amazing. That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, like he was always the narcissist and my mom the codependent, and I always put him into the role of being like the bad guy, and I had really problems. But now I started to heal this whole thing, and I realized that actually my mom was manipulating me actually away from him, you know, and not her fault. She is fucking lonely. I actually did parts with both of them, which was like the most healing experience ever. Yes, I do this now with every one of my clients. I do parts work where, you know, you are your parents. And that was so incredible because I realized what they are really about. And with my dad now, it's like there is a whole lot of, I feel like everything he was telling me, I perceived through a filter. Yeah, and now that I've healed this, I can really connect to sensitivity, which is so beautiful. And I realized that he was always the one being in the corner of the family. He was basically scapegoated by all of us, because instead of him being codependent, you know, he was setting really strict boundaries. But the thing is, for me also, like, actually both narcissist and codependent have such good qualities. And to me, being able to heal my codependence and realizing how I am narcissist made me actually realize that some of the narcissist qualities are so good for me, you know. Like, they make me have really strict boundaries, they make me be on stage, they make me do things like this. So I guess what I'm getting at is that I'm trying to lift both of these aspects of mine up into a very empowered state of being and taking the good qualities. I mean, of course, my amazing empathy, you know, in my work as a practitioner or when I'm talking to people, but the narcissist has amazing qualities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. And that's really great that shift is like happening with your family. So I had the same family dynamic with the dad was the narcissist, mom was the codependent, and also the same realization where I had been constantly pitted against my dad, the narcissist. It was like everything bad, you're terrible. And it really wasn't until somebody, like, I sat in front of a therapist, and my whole life story had been about how he was such a terrible person. And, like, don't get me wrong, there's still, like, I just cried like 3 days ago because of how angry I am about the fact that my dads, you know, were not present in my life. So I'm not at that place of being able to forgive him. But I will say that sitting in front of that therapist and having her tell me, do you see that that your mother allowed that to happen? And I was like, what? Like, how could you say that? Because I was so enmeshed with my codependent parent that there was no way in hell that I could possibly see them as bad. I was like, what do you mean? She's always been there. She's been my ride or die. It's the only thing I have. Because if I were to see her as bad or oh my God, like what would that mean about my entire reality? So when I finally accepted, like, wow, okay, there's actually bystander trauma here, because the codependent is the bystander. They're the ones who lets this abuse happen. And they let it happen because they're getting their needs met all the while. And all the while, they're pointing at this guy saying, that's why you're upset. That's why. And you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be mad at him. And then really, they're not taking any of the blame. And so it wasn't until I actually was like, oh my God, I have to put some of the blame on my mom and look at the ways in which I've been programmed to see the narcissist as the worst person in the world. And I had more compassion for that. Yeah. Afterwards, of seeing, like, I think that the lens that I was given, because we're so susceptible to suggestion as kids, that the lens I was given was a really dirty lens, and it was not an accurate perception. It was a very distorted perception, because if somebody had given me the lens of, this is a person who is in so much pain that they have to, like, here's a narcissist, they're in so much pain that they had to close themselves off from feeling anybody else, that would have been a totally different experience, right?
Yeah. But I think also what the problem was is that, so the codependent is enmeshing us, right? The narcissist is abandoning us, and abandonment trauma feels worse,
Yeah.
because at least we are still close with the codependent. So, and that's why I think when you then start to heal those traumas, at some point you get so angry at the codependent because you didn't even realize the trauma and how severe it was. And then, yeah, I think that's what's happening. And I have the same thing, yeah, with the abandonment. Sometimes, like, it really comes up more. But yeah, I think it's beautiful for me, because I realized that my dad has the same thing, like he feels he has like no one really, because he can't let them close. And now, yeah, it's like a time, I don't know, I think it's a real big healing experience for me. And that is, it's like the best, when something was so stuck. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. I have good news though about, like, my relationship with my codependent mother. So I was able to have, like, multiple moments of really expressing to her, like, wow, I'm so mad at you for the fact that you. And then what's interesting, because I want to talk about this, because if anyone deals with this, if you have a codependent parent, and because typically, not always, but typically they're the person that's going to be more open. You probably already have a relationship with them. It might be easier for you to talk to them about healing and what's happening. And what I noticed was that she immediately started crying, and she was, like, really upset and hysterical, and, like, I did my best, and, like, started going to this, like, I'm so sorry. And I realized in that moment that even that was an attempt to keep herself good, that she needed to be the victim of, like, oh, and, like, okay, like, on the one hand, she was genuinely in pain, and she genuinely did not want to have hurt me. But I had to stop her again. So notice that if you go to talk to a codependent and they flip the script on you again, and there's like oh, how could you say that? I'm so sorry, and I feel so hurt. And they make it all about them again. And it's not about your feelings. Then just notice that and say, hey, again, now you're talking about your experience, and I'm really needing you to be present with how I'm feeling. Like, this is not about the fact that you did the best you could. I understand that. You need to be here for my upset. So that's just what I want to put that out there.
Oh, I think that is such a good tip. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that they're like this, our cultural values of this, that self-sacrifice is good, and that the victim mentality is like helping them. But also, I think you doing that is really actually so good for your mom, and for any codependent. Like, if you really help them to see that, because of course it is super painful to look at our shadows, and especially if we are parents, because of course we love our children, we don't want to do that, but it is so important that we understand how we've hurt people. And yeah, I can say I acted narcissistic, I acted codependent, and know that I've hurt people, but understanding this will help me to not do it in the future again. and especially to become really free and to not do this, because as we said before, it's about not being able to meet your needs directly. And so imagine, guys, if you feel like you have maybe codependent issues, and let's say in relationships, your need is to get praise or something. That could be maybe a good one. Like, you don't need to be the perfect housewife, or you don't need to be the perfect cook, or be the perfect mom to get praise. You can just find a partner who praises you for whatever you want to be praised for. You know, that is real liberation. Going for what you really, really want and asking for it directly, and not manipulating. Like, that really needs to stop.
Yeah. That's like the highlight. That should just be the highlighted key of this whole thing, is exactly what you just said. And I don't think that I could have said that any better.
Yeah, because what Rowan before said is boundaries. Like, boundaries are basically the cure for codependency and also narcissism, actually. And what people don't understand is boundaries are not just what you don't want. Boundaries are also what you want. Boundaries are basically a personal preference, a choice. It's all what makes you a separate person from another person. So if you get that, if you understand how to set boundaries, how to communicate them in a super, just in the normal way, you will not have problems anymore with codependency.